the end of last class, which we can briefly address here, and then I may just, say we'll resume after class. If you want to have further discussion, we can do that. So the question was asked, did we ever consider Jesus and what his state of affairs physically was following the resurrection? And so it directly related to this idea of his blood. And so that was kind of what was posed. Did we ever consider that? And so we have Doug to thank for that. So let's just briefly discuss the possibilities, and if there are any biblical and or philosophical and or logical conclusions that we can make, and then also realize that there's some things we just don't know, but we'll see. So what are your thoughts? What was Jesus' his physical state of affairs when he was resurrected? Is that not the essence of your question? Okay.
Can't do both. Like
Both what?
a little bit of human and a little bit of supernatural, whatever.
Well, we have to, I mean, it has to be both. Or does it? Beth?
I think since there was a bodily resurrection, he conquered death. I think it was a bodily resurrection, and somewhere in the ascension may change. I don't think we're
Okay.
alive in heaven, but I think Jesus, when he walked the earth,
Okay.
there was a bodily resurrection.
Okay. So there's one view that states that prior to, he was fully man, fully God, was crucified, rose again, bodily, same body, was resurrected. And we talk about this glorified status, that occurred at his ascension. And so that is one possibility, is that that it was, for example, what was Lazarus' state of affairs when he was resurrected? Bodily resurrection. Was he any different physically after that? So it is possible to be bodily resurrected in the same state of affairs prior to death. We don't know exactly what caused Lazarus' death, do we?
No, but it didn't indicate he lost all his blood as
Okay.
Jesus did.
All right, well, I want to throw something out here. Doug, you brought up last week that it was pierced in his side and therefore lost all of his blood.
Well, the blood, Bible says the blood came out and then walked.
Right. So, does that saying that, where do we get the idea of all his blood?
Probably from that.
From our minds.
Well, I mean, if he's hanging on the cross, how would blood from his feet come out his side?
Well,
How did everything that was settled down in here come out here?
I do know from butchering animals that, you can, and this is gross, but this is,
No, I'm just saying.
you can shoot a hog and then jump in there and stick it in the throat, and its heart will keep pumping, and it will pump out, I'm not gonna say 100% of its blood.
Okay.
It'll pump out a lot.
Sure, that's what I'm saying, but I'm just trying to get the idea here is where do we get the idea that it was all, is that a necessary concept?
That's a good question.
Was,
What else in the speak, drains some out to
possibly, I mean, if that were the case, he would have bled out from that, he would have died from that, but I guess what I'm getting at is because the comment was made, and I think it was kind of reaffirmed in other places, that that all of his blood exited his body. Do we know that biblically?
No, but
No.
their blood go through the wall.
Could it what?
Natural blood go through the wall, like Jesus did.
Okay, well, that's what we're talking about here. Well, that's, you're talking about where they were in the room, the doors were closed and everything, and then Jesus appeared before them. So we are saying that because of that, then he had to be something other than what he was before.
Yeah.
So there's no miraculous way that he could enter the room unless he was not human.
Well, you could say that for Philip. When he got through with the heat, he appeared someplace else.
Right.
So that's good. You can't say it couldn't happen.
Right. So so it is possible to maintain human form and relocate miraculously. Right? Go ahead.
It's not impossible, it's absolutely for sure. Luke 24:39 says, he tells his apostles, disciples, see my hands and my feet, that it is I myself, touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have.
Right. Okay. So,
But he didn't say blood. He
Okay.
said flesh and bones.
okay. So are we saying then that he was flesh and bone and was without blood at this point?
Why would you say flesh and blood?
That's just a second.
Yeah.
It also says avoid foolish arguments.
Well, I'm not saying this is, well, this has ramifications because the New Testament tells us that in 1 Corinthians and also in 1 John, that we shall be as he is when we see him, that our glorified bodies will be in his likeness. And so if we do want to wonder, or we do want to have some inkling about what our resurrected bodies are going to be, because there's so much falsehood out there on this, isn't there? About what heaven's going to be like?
Doesn't say we're gonna have a new body though.
What do you mean new?
Isn't there some reference? I'm not sure. But is there a reference that we'll have a new body?
1 Corinthians 15, it talks about that this body will put on the imperishable. So new in the sense of glorified. So it has to, something has to, it's going to take place. We're going to be in 1 Thessalonians, it says that be transformed, right? In the twinkling of an eye. We will be changed. So Paul's talking about those two things, and so Danny's squirming in his seat because he wants to talk about 1 Corinthians 15:33 or 53. Is it 53?
Well, I'm there, but the question I want to go for you is, and I'm not arguing, I don't know. It says it's bone and natural body, but it's great and spiritual. If they're in a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. What does that mean there?
Well, that's not the only thing it says. If you look, there's three comparisons made. Perishable, imperishable, right? Weakness and power, right? Sown in weakness, raised in power. And then natural and then spiritual.
Spiritual.
Yeah. So, then we have to figure out, is that saying that we're going to be some like ethereal, bodiless spirit? But I think the scriptures as a whole, when we take them all together, especially even this passage in 1 Corinthians.
Doesn't it refer somewhere? I don't know where, that there's not going to be any temptations.
Yes.
So how can you not have temptations with flesh?
Because it's transformed.
So you won't have flesh?
No, it's still going to be, This is the concept, will it be actual, like, the exact same essence? Let me read to you what I think is a good understanding. What's that?
Plain Greek, that's what I know.
The verse 50 says, flesh and blood will not enter.
Inherent.
Inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay, we can talk about that. So does that mean that,
Sinless flesh, I mean, if we not sin, sin flesh.
that's one thing that I want to really dig into at a later time. Does this mean that is there such a thing as sinless flesh and blood? So he can't inherit? Throughout Scripture, flesh and blood is linked to what metaphorically? Metaphor. What about a child? A child? Now, listen to this. I did quite a bit of reading on this. This was talking about the difference. I read some on Denver Sizemore and also Cochrane and some others today, and another author that you guys wouldn't be familiar with. But in 1 John 3:2, it says, "It is not appeared as yet what we shall be." And this is John writing. Right? This is after Jesus has ascended. 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. "It has not appeared as yet what we shall be. We know that when He appears, we will be like Him because we will see Him just as He is." Okay, logically, what does that mean? If we look at it from a logical state of affairs, did John interact with Jesus after His resurrection? So then how could he say those two things in the same sentence? Unless what? Unless Jesus changed somehow. Are you with me? At His ascension, He was glorified. So in the incarnation, when He was resurrected, it was essentially the same Jesus that was resurrected from the grave, and then is glorified. He was glorified when He ascended to heaven. You got to smile. What are you struggling with?
When we die, they put us in the ground.
Okay,
We go to paradise, right?
or spirit,
We go somewhere without a body.
right? It says to be absent from the body is to be with the Lord, and it says that death is when spirit and body are separated. And it yearns to be reunited.
But when he was in paradise, they recognized him.
Still was recognizable.
So there has to be some form of a body.
Sure. There's some mechanism of recognition. Where does one preclude the other? Does one rule out the other?
I just want to be 6'5" then.
Me too. Me too. Me too. I'll take either one. Hey, someone asked me what I was up to. The other day I walked in the building, somebody said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "My ideal weight if I was 11 feet tall." But
Gary wants to be 5'8". You hear that, Brian?
what?
I want Gary Hornsby to be 5'8".
5'8". Oh yeah. Yeah. Put it in the suggestion box. So anyhow, we talk about this first. It has not appeared as yet what we shall be. We know that when He appears, we will be like Him because we will see Him just as He is. Now, was there anybody that had the advantage of seeing glorified Christ?
Yes.
Who?
Peter, James, and John.
Okay, at the Transfiguration, but past His ascension.
John,
Trick question.
Paul.
Paul. Because, see, Paul, he writes, he says that he had some experiences where he was shown some things that he's not allowed to even talk about. You guys remember that? And so he alludes to some things in a way that no other New Testament writer does. So it's reasonable to conclude that this is going to take on some other form than what it is now, but still be recognizable as who we are. Because the seat of who we are is really where? And you guys just brought up a great example. The seat, the center, it's our soul. And so whatever physical transformation is going to take place, we're still going to be recognizable. So it seems best to conclude, all right, let me back up. It may be that the Apostle Paul saw the glorified Christ, look in Acts 9 or 1 Corinthians 9:1 or 15:8, but what he saw was surely more than the other apostles had seen prior to the ascension. It seems best to conclude that Jesus arose in his not yet glorified body. Now think about this, so that there could be no mistake on the part of those who knew him that he was the same Jesus who died on the cross, and that he was now truly alive again. Also, the best inference is that he received his transformed and glorified body at the time of his ascension. Thus, what is often called the resurrection body of Jesus was not actually received at the resurrection, but upon his re-entry into the spiritual heavenly dimension when he ascended into the glory of the Lord. Okay, so there's more that I didn't mark a spot in this book, but over here, Sizemore kind of backs that concept up. What kind of a body will the redeemed have? He will remake those wretched bodies of ours so that they will resemble his own glorious body by the power of his, which makes him the master of everything that is. That's Philippians 3:21. John tells us when he appears, we shall be like him. 1 John 3:2 and Revelation 22:4 says they will see his face and his name will be on their foreheads. These scriptures indicate that our bodies will be similar to Christ's glorified body and that we should be able to see him and the Heavenly Father since we will be like them. Paul calls the new body a spiritual body. It will be a real body, but one that is suited to our spiritual existence in heaven. So it may not have flesh and blood exactly the way we know it. If it's going to be some sort of glorified transformation, but yet still who we are. That seems to be the most logical conclusion. Any other thoughts?
I have another question.
Okay, listen. Don't let loose another rabbit. If you do, we may have
Old
to...
Testament Lord, the reincarnate Christ.
Pre-incarnate? Pre-incarnate? Yeah.
What did I say?
Reincarnate? Yeah. We're missing the P there. Okay, gotcha. Pre-incarnate Christ.
So, people saw him,
Those are called theophanies,
yeah.
where he or took on some form that humankind was able to behold him. Yeah, so that would be a theophany. Okay, so if you have any further questions or want, I'll be glad to pass on some of my reading materials, and we can talk about that later. So, but we do need to get going on page 78. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, did that help?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So did he have one?
I say yes when he was resurrected.
I think God can do whatever he wants.
Sure, we know that's possible. But let me just ask you this question, and you can look at this from purely a medical standpoint. If you had a body with just flesh and bone and no blood in it, what would that look like to anybody that interacted with it? And the over and over again it says life is in the what? Then if he doesn't have blood in his resurrected form, he truly not what? Living.
Good point.
So,
Thank you.
now, is that exact, I think, when he ascended, he was glorified, in that glorified form, which is going to return, we will behold it, and that is going to be the likeness, whatever form that is, that we will take on.
So it doesn't matter how much blood he shed. He did shed.
One drop's enough
Yeah.
of sinless blood. It doesn't say that you needed it, 4 pints, But I mean, clearly he died, his blood was shed, he died for us, that's the main thing. And there was blood to offer when he went to the true tabernacle in heaven, when he went to the altar there and offered it. So,
Medical term, well, pericardial fusion, when you pierce the side, blood will come out and then water.
right,
That's where you have it.
right, right,
That's for a lot of
Well,
yes.
He was speaking from that whole thing.
No doubt.
He lost all the blood.
Yeah, the most important thing is that he did shed his blood, he did die. He lost enough blood that he died, it was shed for us. And that's what it was offered upon the altar in the tabernacle in
Even
heaven.
if he lost all of it, God could put it back.
Oh, yes.
He's got miracles. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, God could
Yeah.
put it back. Even if he
No,
lost
there's no doubt about that.
some of it, yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, page 78. We're going to zip right through this because next week we're going to start getting into what's called the atonement. Okay, so we're going to end up here with an interesting section called the gospel drama. So, let me ask you this question. Backing up to what we talked about last week with miracles. What was the primary purpose of his miracles? To prove his authority, to add authority as his credentials that he was indeed deity and who he said he was, right? Okay, so the question then comes, if his primary purpose was then to affirm his deity, then why were there times when he said, don't tell anybody? If it always was an affirmation of his deity, then why would he tell people, don't say a word?
For one thing, it would get to the point where he couldn't go anywhere or do anything, because there's so many.
Okay, so people, Doug?
In the case of the lepers, it was the Old Testament law that they were supposed to show themselves to the high priest.
Right?
And in a lot, and I don't, Jesus didn't want them to make him king or anything.
Okay, so it was about timing. So there were some other things. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Go ahead.
full prophecy.
Okay, to fulfill prophecies and so forth. It all, because there are a number of things that had to take place in a certain way, right? Now, just consider this just for a second. When you think about these things, did Jesus actively direct the events and people that were happening around him so that things would happen exactly the way he wanted?
Because they hope, some of them hope, even after they.
We're going to talk about one of these examples where he said to the leper, don't say anything, go show yourself to the high priest, don't say anything, but he told everybody and became a problem.
Right.
But as far as all the events and everything, was it necessary that he be lifted up and crucified? Yes, why? Prophesy. Was it necessary that it occur a certain time?
Yes.
What event was it that's absolutely critical and parallel that surrounded the crucifixion that had to happen? Passover, right? So, see, this is where we sometimes just throw it into his power as far as he can direct things. But all this occurred while people maintained their free will. Judas, was he made to do? Did he freely choose? So how, see, that's where we need to just take a step back and stand in awe of his ability to still orchestrate an absolute must-be outcome and people still maintain their free will. It's absolutely amazing.
That would be the Father talking presence. He knows what's going to happen before before.
Right, yeah, I'm speaking, yeah, but even so, people still maintain their free will. See, it's one thing to say, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and it has to happen that way. It's another thing to work out your plan amongst all these free will creatures.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that the plan couldn't be orchestrated to a point to where they had the opportunity to make that choice.
Could there be state of affairs that were manipulated in such a way that it would be likely that they would choose that? Possibly. See, this is again where we could chase this rabbit of how does God act in His sovereignty? How does He interact with us and His plans still unfold, things that were prophetic? Now, are there times when He definitely does intervene? Yes. So we could chase this rabbit again for quite a while, but I just wanted you to consider that. Go ahead.
There's nothing that says that we don't know what our free will be then.
Say that again.
Even though we have free will, there's nothing that says that He doesn't know what our free will be.
He knows.
He knows.
Yeah, He knows what's going to happen.
Yes.
So He's able to, see, that comes under His omniscience. See, we tend to regulate this to His omnipotence, but I think this has more to do with His omniscience. And then because of what He does know and what we're going to choose, He's able to work. But when you consider every free will decision of every person for all time up until that point, and especially within the people of the nation of Israel and all the people that surrounded them, for Him to work out the Messiah coming at this time, at the exact right time, it's incredible. Because you have to consider all the contingencies about what somebody might choose. And each time this person chooses over here, now you've got a whole other set of branches going off of that. So just think of the amount of probability that He knows all the probability and what is going to occur. In that just, if that doesn't set you back for a minute, I don't know what does. So, sometimes Jesus instructed those He had healed not to tell anyone about what He had done. In Mark chapter 1, we were just talking about this fella, the leper. And he came to Jesus and said, if it is your will, you can heal me. He said he had compassion, and it was His will, and He did heal him, but He said, go show yourself to the priest, don't tell anybody. And he did not listen. He, in fact, told so many people that we come to verse 45 of chapter 1. But he, the leper that was healed, went out and began to proclaim it freely and spread the news about to such an extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city, but stayed out in unpopulated areas, and they were coming to Him from everywhere. So He put it on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I mean, like the second it happened, and then it went viral. So things still went viral even then, right? Maybe a little slower. But anyway, so many have been puzzled by Jesus' demand for silence, since the key purpose for His miracles is supposed to be to provide evidential support for His divine claims. These messianic mystery passages in Mark have led some to conclude that Jesus never intended to claim deity. That is a ridiculous conclusion. Sometimes Jesus intentionally avoided making direct statements regarding His deity. See, sometimes He was very direct, and other times He was indirect. Son of Man was both direct and indirect at the same time. You guys remember our discussion about the Son of Man? And so, how did He normally refer to Himself? What was His most common moniker for the Son of Man? Yes. Jesus apparently preferred the safe title Son of Man over the more controversial title Son of God. One of the advantages of the title Son of Man is that in Jewish thinking it did not carry the full divine implications of the title Son of God. The Gospels do not record any blasphemy charges against Jesus for calling Himself Son of Man. There was a legal difference between Son of Man and Son of God. Interesting. Another advantage with this phrase, Son of Man, is that the third person format cannot easily be used against Jesus in a court of law. It is obvious that Jesus intended to refer to Himself when He used the phrase Son of Man, but the Jewish leaders would have had sufficient legal evidence against Jesus if they did not have first-person confession and claim so forth and so on, I am the Son of God. Jesus' preference for the safe title over a title that makes a clear statement of deity has led some to conclude that Jesus never intended to claim deity. Again, a ridiculous conclusion. It's a conclusion with a presupposition attached to it. It's having their mind made up about what is before they come to make their conclusion. So, now, some reasons for Jesus' use of discretion in claiming deity. Jesus apparently did not want demons to testify about him because they would tend to fuel the accusations that he worked in association with demons. Was there ever an event where he was said to be in cahoots with the demons? Yes. So, if demons were the one to testify, then they could turn around and say what? Well, they're just saying that because they're trying to help you out. Interesting. This is one thing I had never really thought about. The Pharisees explained Jesus' ability to cast out demons by saying that demons were actually his partners in pulling off a scam before the people. Given the context of accusation, if the evil demons had declared that Jesus was the Son of God, it would tend to look like a setup. Thus, Jesus commanded demons not to speak about his identity. Jesus, on the next page, apparently took measures to thin out his crowds on occasions when he perceived problems that could interfere with his ministry. So this is what we were talking about over here, is that sometimes the crowds got so big, he intentionally thinned them out or got out of Dodge. Right? So sometimes the crowds were so large that they interfered with his movement and posed a safety risk. A risk for Jesus and his disciple, and a risk for the people in the crowds. Sometimes the large crowds wanted to use their size to manipulate Jesus into doing what they wanted. And then when we see a couple things here. When a crowd wanted to point B to force Jesus to set up an earthly kingdom, he retreated from them. You see that in John 6:15. Jump down to point 4. Jesus' discretion in claiming deity was necessary when a bold claim would serve to hinder his messianic work. There were many occasions when Jesus instructed those he healed to publicize what he had done. There were times when he said, tell people, right? Let everybody know. Thus, it is apparent that the occasions of discretion were not intended to deny his deity, but rather to protect his ministry in difficult situations. Again, why would he seek to protect his ministry? The timing of it. Because, I mean, it could... again, it had to occur in such a way that the circumstances had to be orchestrated as such that it happened in a certain way at a specific time. And so that appears to be the obvious motivation for why in certain circumstances, whether it be geography or political or whatever the reasons were, why he said, do tell someone or don't tell someone. Or he referred to himself in certain ways in different circumstances because of that thing. So these are all strategic moves, which we see here as our next section. Throughout his ministry, Jesus had to protect his ministry from being subverted by his enemies. Now let me ask you this question. What was another possibility that could have happened that would have just wrecked everything?
Flash mob could have killed him.
Could have been killed, right? I mean, you think about the things that could have happened in these circumstances where it could have meant loss of life.
Guards could have killed him before he got to the cross.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's many different things that could have happened along that line. But, I mean, we're talking about the 3 years leading up to that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's so many different circumstances. Now, we could throw a rock in your shoe and ask, well, if something accidental were to happen, would God have stopped it?
You wouldn't.
Is it possible? I mean, I don't know how else to say this. I mean, if they had a camel accident and, you know.
I'm sure he was protected.
What I'm saying, yeah, I mean, if there was some sort of accidental circumstance that could have caused his death, would God have prevented it, Randy?
if I understand right, they did try to kill him one time.
Oh, many times.
He actually walked right through the crack.
Yeah, picked up rocks to stone him and he slipped away. I mean, we don't know for a fact how he got out of these circumstances, but it could have been miraculous in nature as his ability to get out. So, but as far as an accidental thing happening, I believe God would intervene in those circumstances to protect him because of his righteousness, and he has to act according to what he says. Go ahead.
But Genesis 3:15, the whole world could have been trying to kill him. It wouldn't matter what happened to the time of Christ. I mean, that was God's plan.
It was. Yes. Yes. Again, amidst all the free will and all the possible circumstances, again, just shows his power and omniscience. There were always two key dangers for Jesus' ministry: a death by means other than that which had been determined in advance by God, crucifixion on a cross. And we see this proclaimed in prophetic typology, Numbers 21:8-9. All right, what happened? Just don't look, but see if you can figure it out. Use your noodle. Numbers 21:8-9. Prophetic typology, something that meant crucifixion on a cross. This is referenced in John chapter 3. Give you a hint. Numbers 21.
Moses did before.
Across the Red Sea.
Okay, there's poisonous snakes. They were poisonous snakes, and what did they put on a standard? On a pole. Okay? And in John 3 it says, just as the snake was lifted up in the wilderness, the bronze, I must be lifted up as well. So that's typology that we're talking about there. So, it's not that obscure.
It's right on the edge.
Yeah. That's mentioned in John, right before John 3:16.
That's a good point.
So, Deuteronomy 21, we won't look at that. But the two things, a death by means other than that which had been determined, which was crucifixion on a cross, or death prior to the time which had been determined in advance by God. The Passover at the end of a 3.5-year ministry, as proclaimed in prophetic word, Daniel 9:26-27. Now, we ain't going to get into that tonight, because that's letting loose another rabbit. So, Jesus skillfully managed his ministry in such a way that he was able to carry on his daily work in dangerous circumstances and build up to a crucifixion climax at just the right time. So he avoided premature arrest and execution by giving cautious answers in dangerous situations. Could there have been a set of circumstances when he said something and put himself in a situation where he could not escape it? Possibly. But again, he was wise enough and also empowered enough to not do that, since he obviously was able to complete his mission. But we talk about he frequently spoke of himself in the third person using the phrase Son of Man. It was obvious to Jesus' enemies that he was actually making extraordinary claims about when he spoke about the Son of Man. However, this manner of speaking was not legally precise. It's what we just talked about. Jesus sometimes, this is cool, used a hit-and-run strategy that puzzled and frustrated his enemies. So let's look at for time, I was wanting to look at both John 8 and John 10, but let's look at John 10. In John 8 passage, he hits them with, at the end of kind of toying around with them a little bit, he hits them with, before Abraham was, I am, and then he evades them. That's the hit and run kind of technique. So, because that is one where they would have been like, oh no, he didn't. And then they're picking up rocks to stone him and that kind of thing. So, in John 10, he's leading up to a pretty good statement here. Let's look at verse 39 first and work backwards. Therefore they were seeking again to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. That's kind of what we were talking about before. How did he elude them? But why were they trying to get hold of him? Well, let's back up to verse 24. The Jews therefore gathered around him and were saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense?" You know what that is?
Yeah.
They're dropping the bait in the water. Aren't they? You think they really wanted to know? What do they want to do? Legal grounds to kill him, arrest him, seize him. If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Because right to this point, he obviously is what? Toying with them, right? He's not been... Tell us plainly. Jesus answered and said, I told you, and you do not believe the works that I do in my Father's name. These bear witness of me. What works? His miracles, signs, and wonders, right? But you do not believe me because you are not my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give eternal life to them. What? And they shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. Okay, here we go. I and the Father are one. What? The Jews took up stones again to stone him, right? So here they are. They're like, we got what we need, right? And then he says, I showed you many good works from the Father. From which of them are you stoning me? For which of my good works are you stoning me? And so now they're like, the Jews answered him, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, why did they say that? Jesus answered them, has it not been written in your law? I said, you are gods. If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming, because I said, I am the Son of God. If you do not believe the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do them, then you do not believe me. Believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I am the Father. Therefore, they were seeking to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. Hit and run.
Great commentary on verse 39.
Have I? No. I mean, I would assume, I doubt he had a utility belt with a bomb and, but he did have, it wouldn't surprise me if there was something miraculous in the way that he was able to elude them. Why? Or if it was some sort of providential move to get, or if it was just something simple that he was able to elude them. I mean, if you're picturing a scene where they're trying to seize him, they've already taken up rocks to stone him, it's got to be a fairly tense, close quarter situation. It makes you wonder. But it wasn't something so spectacular, because that probably would have been mentioned if it was something like passing through a wall kind of thing. So, we just don't know. Add it to the list. So, Jesus sometimes avoided arrest and execution by withdrawing from dangerous areas. So there were times when he got out of town, went to different places. Now this was interesting. Point 2 at the very bottom. During the day, But this is in his final week in Jerusalem. He retreated each evening to the protection of his friends in Bethany. The Jewish leaders had circulated an arrest warrant for Jesus during his final week in Jerusalem. During the day, Jesus moved about in Jerusalem in the safety of large, sympathetic crowds. Each evening, he sought safe haven a couple of miles away in Bethany. Mark 11:18 through 19. Saturday evening, we see this in John 12:1. Sunday evening in 11:11 of Mark. Monday evening in Matthew 21:17. And Tuesday evening in John 12:36. Now, I'm going to say something here that is a little bit... What do you find interesting about Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday? And where these accounts are found? Let's say that we just had the book of Matthew. What will we know? Right here, according to these events. If we just had the book of Matthew, what would we know? No, according to this, right here on these points, what would we know about this? What was going on here? What would we know? Where he was where? What if we just had the book of John? What would we know? What if we just had the book of Mark? What would we know? What do we have? All of them. You think that's accident? They wrote what they felt was important. And everything came together through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, so I don't know. Maybe I'm making a little more of this, but when I was looking at it, I was like, hey, that's kind of neat. See, we talk about the harmony of the Gospels. That's not a negative against them. The fact that they're different is actually a positive. Because we have things like this. So, Jesus sometimes avoided a premature arrest and execution by moving about in large crowds. And then he carefully orchestrated the events, moving down to point 5, of the evening of his arrest to allow himself time to accomplish his objectives. Now, from this point of view, I've never thought of the events of what was occurring with the Last Supper as a strategic move. Have you? But it was. Available in certain times, but also what else had to take place? Judas had to do his thing right at exactly the right time. And this is an interesting point. I want you to look at this on your own because we're out of time. Point 8, Jesus did not allow Judas to know in advance the location of the Last Supper. Think about that. Because what could have happened? It could have happened right then, and then what would we miss as the Church of Jesus Christ if it had not occurred? If this isn't that important. For those of you out there, it's important. That was tongue-in-cheek. Okay. But the events of the Last Supper and everything that occurred there, it's so significant. Now see, if you look at Jesus used a secret code to direct Peter and John to the location where he sent them. He told them, go out, you see a fellow carrying a pitcher of water, and you see him, follow him in, tell him we're going to use the room upstairs, it's going to be set, And so, Dr. Presley here surmises, and I think it's a very interesting perspective, that was done for the purpose of keeping Judas to do what he needed him to do at the right time. You talk about circumstances, and orchestrating circumstances and events in such a way that someone might likely choose something. This is one of those, I think. Mm-hmm. Isn't that an interesting perspective on that?
I wonder if it was hard for him because of knowing that and him, loving him.
Oh, certainly.
Like,
The people that you just spent three years or more of your life investing in, spending every day, blood, sweat, and tears, friendship, feelings, all those things. No, I'm sure. I mean, it's not just physical that he went through, it's spiritual and also emotional. Being left behind and betrayed by all these fellas, that surely they had to hurt emotionally. You can feel about being abandoned. He knows what it's like to be abandoned. So, we've got some other things that we could talk about here, but I'd like for you to read that on your own. And then next week, we're going to begin with one of the primary understandings that if we don't have a good grip on this, then we miss pretty much the boat on Christianity. And that is substitutionary atonement. Now, it may seem like a lot of letters and syllables, but we're going to break this concept down. The heart of the gospel is substitutionary atonement. And we will talk about that in great detail for the next few weeks. I'm saying the heart of the gospel is substitutionary atonement. That's going to be the next section of our lessons. And why that is at the core of Christianity. Now, what's fascinating is that there are scholars out there now that are saying that the concept of substitutionary atonement is not only wrong, but it's wicked. I'll pull you up some quotes, and then you'll know not to buy his books. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to thank you for letting us have that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, that can be scary sometimes. You never know how things are going to go. But I mean, that's the benefit of an opportunity to come together like this, is that we can share ideas and challenge one another and bring up questions that send us on good rabbit chases. And hopefully from these things we grow and learn and challenge one another. And the thing that's important about this, and I've said this at different times, is that a real sign of maturity in a Christian person is the ability to have their ideas challenged. Is to at least be open into hearing both sides of a discussion and think it through and make your decisions. So that is a sign of maturity. And so I think there's a lot of that in here, and I thank you for that. So, any other thoughts or comments before we discuss?